Today I'm going to talk about the subjective and the objective, the holographic, and how that relates to what I call the healing mentality, the mentality needed for spiritual mental healing. And it's also significant if you're looking into spirituality seriously, you're going to find that there's unanimous agreement in that community that all healing has its real roots in mental action. All healing has its roots in the practice of the conscious guidance and control of thought. It's a really big subject, and the problem in talking about it is that every time we make a video, there's always more to say, so we have to be careful not to get sidetracked. So I'm going to try to stick to the point. Above all, practicing the ability to heal mentally, I mean with an emphasis on the healing coming about as a result of pure mental work, requires first and foremost a willingness to undergo a huge shift in the personal mental perspective that most human beings are conditioned to looking out from, a shift from the norm. It's a shift that human thought at first might find radical. But this shift is really the foundation of effective mental healing, and it's a shift that needs to take place before we're going to get anywhere with this subject. Or you'll find yourself barking up the wrong tree. And in fact, the more you look into this subject, the more clear it is, the more clear it will become that every healing, as we already said, is actually a mental healing. And it will become clearer when we get into understanding subjectivity, your manifest thought conditions, every one of them, are the direct result of your thoughts. If you've heard of the placebo effect and the nocebo effect, you already get the point, and we'll save that discussion for another video. Well, let's go first in the direction of talking about the differences between an objective perspective and a subjective perspective. Human beings are taught kind of automatically in the environment we grow up in that we're born into an external world. We're taught that we live in a world of external material circumstances, and that getting ahead in life involves learning how to outsmart all the circumstances, avoid all the potential dangers, and manipulate the matter as appropriate. And this point of view is normal and common among humans. But it's really the basic problem. It's really why the world is stuck where it is. At this point of view is what we're defining as objectivism, looking on the things that seem to surround us as objects outside of ourselves. The necessary big shift in perspective is this. as we said, our upbringing and what we think of really unthinkingly as just common sense teaches us that we experience an objective life, just like we just described, a life in which we deal with things outside of ourselves, a life in which we constantly deal with things that feel like they're happening to us, out of our control, things that we apparently have little or no influence over. And we go on assuming that this is how life works. And seldom, if ever at all, does anybody question if this is the way life is. Because after all, that's the way life appears to be. And questioning what seems to be the obvious truth, according to our senses, because our senses is what we're conditioned to trusting, questioning that is not the first thing that comes to your mind when you're faced with a problem. But it could be, and it should be, if you want to learn to find your way around a little better. Healing work approached from a pure mental perspective must take exception to this objective assumption. Let's go back for a second and talk about how and why all healing is actually mental in nature. The big perspective, the life perspective shift we're going to talk about practicing, the perspective that's really the foundation of spiritual mental healing, pure spiritual mental healing, involves a subjective interpretation of life. The term subjective is contrary to the term objective. Subjective means we're the subject, contrary to the perspective that we live in a world that's external to us. And we can gain control over everything in our life, everything, by understanding and adapting a subjective interpretation of our being. And subjective means that everything we experience is really mentally within us. It's not outside of us at all, as it appears to be. And as most human thought educates us to feel and think, subjective interpretation suggests that we actually mentally create every one of our own circumstances in life. That our manifest world is actually the direct product of the sum total of our thoughts, conscious and subconscious. And so our manifest world goes so far as to include not only the environment we live in, but even our own bodily conditions. So we create automatically, through the action of being conscious, our own quality of environment and our own quality of body. Consciousness is actually the real author of our reality. The problem is that too often we're not conscious of what we're being conscious of. The good news is that we have the ability to steer and control our own thoughts and perceptions. Because consciousness is made up of just that, our own thoughts and perceptions. Now let's first at least approach practical examples so we can give this theoretical, philosophical talk some substance that we can wrap our figurative hands around. When human sense reports to you that you're either well or sick, taking the subjective point of view offers to you the possible explanation that the feeling of your bodily condition isn't actually a report of the conditions themselves, but it's a report that indicates the way you feel in your subconscious thought, because it is your subconscious thought that forms your manifest experience. And whether that's sick or well is the direct and manifest product of the quality of the deepest thoughts entertained in subconscious mind, the product of the workings of your most solid beliefs and convictions, your personal realities. And whether those are good or bad, right or wrong, all that's of no consequence to your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind doesn't know anything of the concepts of the quality of the thought it's entertaining. The subconscious mind's primary function is to transform the thoughts it's entertaining into experience. And it does that constantly, without regard for whether the thoughts are right, wrong, good, bad, whatever, with no regard for understanding the quality of what it's given to work with. But using the conscious mind, we can control what's given to the subconscious mind. But the subconscious mind is like a machine that just processes what it's given. It produces an output. That output is your circumstantial experience and the quality of your bodily presentation. So in order to stay healthy and be healthy and to live in a pleasant environment, we have to learn to feed the contents of our subconscious mind healthy things. And as I already said, we direct the subconscious mind by actively managing our conscious mind. So how do we go about adapting a subjective perspective when we're so conditioned to thinking objectively? Well, subjectivity isn't learned so much as it's simply recognized and understood. The approach of subjectivity sort of presents life as it already actually is in its essence. Life is subjective. Everything there is comes to you through your consciousness. And nothing you experience can come into your awareness any other way, because consciousness is awareness itself. That's an impossible point to deny. You have always been, your entire human life, you've been internally, mentally producing conditions that appear to be external and material to you, simply by being actively conscious, subconsciously and consciously. And the manifestation of that activity takes place in the subconscious mind. The effect of your conditions, the quality of your apparently circumstantial conditions, is a direct result of its own cause. But we're not used to thinking about what is the cause of the conditions we're seeing. But that cause is your consciousness. Your conscious input into the subconscious mind. And the resulting appearance that's created by subconscious thought includes both your bodily condition and health and your circumstances. And you do all of this without even realizing it, through the action of your own, too often unmonitored thought. So you can begin to get your life experiences under your control in proportion as it becomes clear to you that life really is subjective, under your influence. It's not a bunch of things that are happening to you. It's the way things are, in a sense, above human consideration. And this subjective oneness of all is already available for each one of us to understand and make use of at every moment, in every circumstance. But we're ignorant of this. No one tells us these things in our education. We have to find alternative ways to look at things in order to make changes. We have to see things differently. In spiritual essence, everything is one, and everything is interconnected, and everything is, in quantum terms, entangled. And that's not just directly apparent at the human level. Understanding and realizing this point is powerful. We can each learn to practice a consciousness that favors our own well-being. And we do this on the basis of understanding this hidden truth about life experience called subjectivity. Now you might be asking a question like, how is it, and what do you mean by saying that everything I see as separated and apart from me is one? Well, let's step aside and address this question and then come back to where we were, because this is an important point. One of the most beautiful examples I've heard to explain the concept of the oneness of things that appear to be separated, I heard used in a lecture by Greg Braden. Craig Braden used the concept of the hologram. I think it's a great example. A simple example of a hologram is those little three-dimensional cards, three-dimensional things in which the context of the 3D picture looks like it changes as you move it around according to the angle that your eye sees it at. An interesting feature of the hologram. This feature illustrates the concept of an infinitely yet individually expressed God. And it's the feature that differentiates the hologram from every other normal everyday picture. And so it also illustrates the differentiation between the human being and the spiritual man. If you would take a normal everyday picture and cut it into millions of individual components, what you would have is millions of individual separate pieces of the picture. Each one of them would be different from its neighbor. In order to put the picture back together, we'd have to put all those individually separated pieces back into the same order, like putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. But with a hologram, do you know what you'd get if you take a hologram and cut it into millions of separate pieces? It's a surprising answer, and it's a great illustration. Every one of these little pieces of a hologram, if you could put each little microscopic piece under a microscope and look at its contents, you'd find that each one of those little pieces, no matter how small it is, contains all of the information that's contained on the big hologram before you cut it up. In other words, if you could expand each one of the little microscopic pieces of the hologram that you cut up, you'd find the entire hologram repeated in its original state millions of times, or however many times you cut up the picture. I doubted this story at first, that a hologram literally works this way, so I did some research online to verify that fact, and if you doubt it, then I suggest you do the same thing. But when I first heard it, it came from the mouth of a reputable quantum physicist. But there's more to it than that. The internet's a wonderful source for information, and anyway, that is a defining characteristic of a hologram. And that qualifies the statement about oneness, about how things that appear to be separated are really all one. So let's get back to where we were. We can begin to get life experiences under our control as soon as it becomes clear to us that life really is subjective, and we treat it that way. Because it's the way things are in the highest sense. And this subjective oneness of all is already available to us at every moment, now, in every circumstance. In spiritual essence, in the sense described with the hologram example, everything is one. Everything is interconnected. And as I said, that concept even addresses quantum entanglement, which is subject for another video, because I said this is an endless topic and it's easy to get off on a tangent and get sidetracked. All of this is not directly apparent at the human level of perception, the objective point of view. But the understanding and realization of this subjectivity, the point of the literal oneness of everything, is really powerful. And we each have the capability to learn to practice a consciousness that favors our own well-being on the basis of understanding this hidden truth about life experience called subjectivity. The divine mind, the mind spelled with a capital M, the source of all that is, source with a capital S, is capitalized because it means absoluteness. The source of all that is, of which we each are the image and likeness, is like an infinitely huge hologram. And we're like an infinitude of tiny cut-up pieces of that hologram, each of us reflecting and containing all of the information, all of the boundless glory, all of the intelligence of the one divine mind. We appear to be objectively separated, but we are entangled. And as human beings, we're just not aware of this. We see ourselves continually as separated from one another. It's easy to picture, then, that if our objective is to gain true control over our lives and over our bodies, to be able to demonstrate control over sickness and disease, then it makes the most sense not to look at sickness and disease objectively as external, separated circumstances that we can fall victim to. The only thing we can fall victim to is our own erroneous thought. But that's not the way human life presents itself. It presents itself as valid objectivity. There are no separated circumstances in the infinite holographic unity which is God. And a correct subjective interpretation recognizes that there are no external circumstances. In life, we're always looking at our own thoughts and interpretations, and they are exactly what makes up our own reality. Our thoughts and interpretations of things are the root of everything in the life we experience. A correct subjective interpretation gives us an understanding that sickness has its basis and origin deep within our own thought, in erroneous assumptions, in erroneous convictions, convictions that are based in negative suggestion. In suggestions that are only imaginatively outside of the allness of that which is. Now, obviously, objectively, if we're sick, we're sure we're sick. We're looking at the sickness from an objective perspective. But when we adapt a subjective interpretation, we can be sure that whatever we're going through, whatever's going on in our life, is only necessarily the result of the quality of every aspect of the thoughts that we're allowing to be entertained deep within our subconscious mind. Once this change in perspective from objectivity to subjectivity takes root in human consciousness, as soon as it takes root in human subconscious thought, then proceeding with the practice of spiritual healing will not feel like a strange thing anymore. It won't feel odd. In fact, it'll feel perfectly logical. And you'll begin to feel that when you see how things fit together, it's the only logical path to follow, especially after you get a few successful experiences under your belt. But it's not necessarily going to be easy to get there, because it involves a lot of work to retrain your interpretation of consciousness. But active subjectivity, that's the foundation of effective, pure mental healing work. Active subjectivity means looking at the situation and seeing that the solution is already there. It's a matter of making it manifest through the process of knowing it. And that's the healing mentality. The healing mentality is always available, and we need to be willing to exercise authority mentally over whatever problem we're facing in order to make use of it. We need to become constantly aware that we are in control. But the problem is that we usually don't realize that we just haven't claimed the driver's seat. Each one of us is blessed with the ability to direct our own thought. And our own thought, our own deepest subconscious conviction, is what creates the life, the circumstances, and even the body in which we live. In fact, I would add at this point that the real objective is not to heal the body. The real objective is to see and understand what's true. The body is simply the manifestation that changes in response to what's happening in the subconscious mind. The best words I can think of to describe the healing mentality are enlightened conviction. And to human sense, personally, I know I can too often seem to be out of touch with this feeling. It's really easy to be constantly sucked back into the objective interpretation of life because we're just continually mentally surrounded by it, and it's always being like fired at us because the world thinks objectively. And to gain control over ourselves, we have to make the choice to actively constantly think and act subjectively, which is contrary to the way the world is in the habit of thinking. So we have to be willing to think differently, not follow the crowd, not be a sheep. I believe that feeling out of touch with the healing mentality is an indication that the influences of everyday human life continually undermine our choice to practice enlightened subjective conscious conviction. And either we're not aware of our holographic sort of connection with God, or if we are aware of it, we get sidetracked and we forget about it because of all of the interference that's being constantly fired at us in the human world. Suggestion's powerful stuff. We have to remain on guard at the door of our subconscious thought, and we have to be careful only to admit those thoughts that will result in harmonious experience. And everyday human life tends to lure us away from our guard post. And when we wander away from our guard post and intruding thought finds its way in, and then we'll feel like we have a struggle and a fight to get rid of it. When that happens, it helps to keep this in mind. Intruding thoughts that are the root cause of negative manifestations in our life or in our body are only suggestions. They're not facts. A suggestion is not truth. A suggestion is the negation of truth. And the negation of truth is by definition error. The thoughts that are permitted to enter subconscious thought, whether they're positive and good or negatively suggestive, those thoughts could be thought of as the drivers of the vehicle, and the vehicle is you. So, suggestion as a driver has to be removed and kept out of subconscious thought. Subconscious thought is the control room, the steering wheel of your life. And subconscious thought goes wherever its driver points the steering wheel. And so we have to learn how to take negative suggestion out of the driver's seat of our thought, which sounds challenging, but it really is as simple as recognizing that it's only suggestion driving our thought. And when we see that, then a light comes on that says, I don't have to listen to that. I have the power to change the way I think. So how does this relate to disease and sickness? Disease and sickness always begin with a suggestion. And that suggestion is, I am sick. If we look through the lens of objectivism, as our human training teaches us to, obviously, you are sick. But we can change our glasses. We don't have to look through the lens of objectivism. If we look through the lens of subjectivity, you're well. And the condition of your sickness can then be recognized to be based in erroneous thought accepted and entertained in deeply rooted subconscious mind, in pure erroneous conviction in something which has no validity. Your natural state is health. Your natural state of is truth. An unnatural state is not truth. It's just not valid. So the good news is that when we're dealing with sickness or disease, although to human sense it seems like we have to struggle to find health again, as soon as we have this realization about the negative nature of suggestion, its invalidity becomes clear and the struggle's not significant. There is no struggle. Why? Destructive beliefs and convictions are pure suggestive negativity. And destructive negativity is nothing more than the inverted upside-down presentation of its valid counterpart, which is positive harmony. So suggestive negativity is the only real essence of sickness and disease. There's nothing to suggestion, and negativity is only the presentation of the absence of something, not the presence of it. So although the fight might feel like a fight initially, it's won on the basis of understanding the invalidity of negative suggestion. And the statement, I am sick, is pure, false, negative suggestion. It may feel hard to follow this advice, but stop being a human being and never confirm such a statement. Because it's your belief that gives the suggestion the only power it can have to turn itself into a manifestation, which is your personal reality, but you have control over your personal reality. Suggestion is powerful only when it's recognized and believed. Positive suggestion represents truth, while negative suggestion only represents error, mistaken perception. The positive's valid, the negative's invalid. And your belief is what makes either one of them into your personal human reality, which is not necessarily associated with absolute spiritual reality. You can align your personal human reality with absolute spiritual reality through the subjective recognition of that which is valid. Human thought spends no time at all considering the validity or invalidity of whatever the experiences we're going through, because human thought's based on objective sense, and objective sense just believes whatever it sees, whatever is presented to it through the human senses. Maintaining our health corresponds then to doing a proper job of standing guard at the doorway to our own subconscious thought through active conscious thinking, through active observation of what kind of thoughts am I going to allow myself to entertain. And healing means getting in there and removing whatever's driving thought in the wrong direction. The first task in healing, then, is identification of the intruding error. What's gotten into subconscious mind? What needs to be ejected? Then once the intruding thought's been unmasked and identified, then you can differentiate it from the other thoughts, grab it by the scruff of the neck and eject it. But as long as all of our thoughts continue to appear to be equally valid, as long as the intruding error is masquerading as valid, once it enters the subconscious realm, we have allowed ourselves to be at its mercy, and we have allowed it to take the driver's seat. This is what we have to stop. In real practice, actually, we end up ultimately not having to actually think through all this logic. It becomes automatic, and it becomes a part of our normal mental operation. And as in every life practice, practice makes perfect, whereas lack of practice makes rusty. I remember the first time all this clicked for me. When I was about 12 or 13, I found myself suffering from the symptoms of flu. My mother had taught me all she could about spiritual healing and about guarding thought, had done a good job of guarding thought for me, and up to that point in life, I had relied completely on her mental support whenever a physical issue came up in my experience. By the way, I didn't come from a conventional medical background, so this is why we always thought in this way. I told my mother that I was feeling these flu-like symptoms, which were quote-unquote going around in popular thought. As so often is the case in our modern society, we hear it on TV, hear it broadcast at us in daily gossip and human thought. And I don't recall exactly what she told me in response to my complaint that I felt these symptoms, but I'm sure that it was in line with the above. What I do remember is that she told me that I could handle this mental treatment myself. I didn't need her to do anything. And then something clicked. The exact memory of the experience isn't crystal clear, but what stayed with me forever about it was the feeling that brought about the change, what came as a change in my bodily condition. The feeling stayed with me. As soon as I realized that there wasn't any requirement that I accept as true the suggestion that I was feeling bad as a validity, and as soon as I realized that I'd accepted negative suggestions into my subconscious thought, and I knew what they were, then I realized I possessed the power to eject them, to take them out of the driver's seat. And then symptoms then just were simply no longer with me. But it just happened. I don't remember like doing the process, and this is my best effort to describe the train of thinking that you can go through to accomplish the same result. I didn't really directly think about ejecting negative suggestion. I just thought about those concepts and found myself immediately feeling well. And I simply felt that what I'd experienced was just a bad suggestion. Nothing more to it. I didn't have to say yes to it. And it was the feeling of being well, the knowing of what it feels like to be already well, that brought about what appeared to be an instantaneous change in bodily condition, but what I think it is, humanly it looks like a change in bodily condition. Humanly it looks like a healing, but spiritually it's the realization of present perfection coming to manifestation. And also I found this same point, many experiences that followed this, not to think about symptoms anymore, not to think about symptoms at all. If your thought focuses on symptoms and the need to get rid of symptoms, that only fuels the fire of the suggestion, because your subconscious mind is focused on symptoms. The subconscious mind lets symptoms in the driver's seat and drives the body to the manifestation of symptoms. Whatever the thoughts are that are admitted into subconscious thought, they'll be accepted and heard by your subconscious mind, and then they will become your seeming reality, your human reality. So if you think about ridding yourself of symptoms and suffering, the subconscious mind hears the word symptoms and suffering, and it follows through by producing the manifestation it's been directed to manifest, symptoms and suffering. Of course, you do have to first start with denial of the validity of the symptoms, but then you have to be willing to immediately leave that behind. Change your focus away from eliminating symptoms towards the feeling of knowing how it is to be well, because that is what is already present. I would sum up success in mental healing as the realization, the feeling of eternal health and harmony, allowing your deepest thought to be flooded with that feeling, the feeling of divine love. Well, that brings me to a close on these subjects. So if you have comments about any of this, please do provide them. This is my first YouTube video. I've been making practice videos on Facebook Live. I've started a new YouTube channel. There will be a number of videos on this subject that are to follow. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video.